John, it's a pleasure to be back at Oberlin, and try not to abuse the time. I've got my own watch here. I've done something very different this time than I usually do. I prepared the talk sort of two times, one with slides and the other one just writing down sort of what I wanted to say. And it turned out they didn't really mesh. So I've tried to make them mesh, and we'll see what happens. Basically, what I was going to talk about were the political and economic obstacles to sustainable agriculture and food systems in general, but also to put this in the perspective of the food crisis that exists today in this country and around the world. So there are at least hours and hours of things that can be said about individual topics that I will just say, very briefly about. One slide could be a whole course. Actually, I taught a course just like that. And so all I can do is abbreviate and to try to give you, hopefully, a flavor without inundating you with too much material. Flavor for some of the issues as I see it. The food crisis is alive and well, and is part of what's happening in the Middle East right now in North Africa. This was from January, food riots in Nigeria, or also in Egypt, by the way. This is earlier, just before the massive uprising against Venezuela. Also in Tunisia, again, just before. So this was not the only issue, obviously, in what is going on. But it was one of the sparks that got things going. It was a relatively rapid increase in the price of basic foods, which I'll get into. Of course, it's also happened in India, inflation, the food inflation in India. This is last December, 2010, was 18%. Poor Bengalis are trying to get subsidized rice. Bangladesh government solution to rising food inflation is to give rice away. There's a UPI story about the UN warning about the food crisis in Niger. Something just from earlier this week from the Philippines. There's hoarding going on of rice, and the government is being encouraged by their Congress to import rice, usually coming from Thailand, I guess. And in order to try to calm the markets. The one crop that really hasn't increased in price like it did in 2008 is rice. And that is one of the things that's sort of keeping somewhat of a lid on things, at least on the world market. In individual markets, it's another story. Now we get to the really important issues, of course, of food and food crisis. How the food crisis will affect your portfolio in 2011. About 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the senior editor at Barron's magazine, which is a major financial publication in the United States, and I was wondering what in the world she wanted to talk to me about. And she was trying to get opinions of different people about what was going to happen with food prices and land prices, because their clients want to invest in it. And this is one of the problems presently. When times are tough and grain prices go up, companies, this is from 2008, make a killing. It's unbelievable the profits that were made in the grain trading companies, in the fertilizer companies in 2008. We'll see what happens when 2011 prices, profits come in next year. Of course, it also depends on what's happening with the rest of the year. Well, one of the things that I'd like to stress is that even, the title speaks for itself in this article from the UK, from the Independent. Rising prices since 2008 threaten millions with starvation despite abundant crops. So you can have plenty of food, as I'll show you, and you can still have very high prices and a tremendous amount of hunger. And this is all before the food crisis, before 2008. This is from 2002 and 2004. These are headlines in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, both dealing with India. Poor in India starve as surplus wheat rots. It was on the dock to be exported. and it was rotting and people were starving. Want amid plenty, in India paradise. This is a Wall Street Journal headline. Bumper harvest and rising hunger. So this is the routine stuff I'm talking about. This is before the crisis of 2008 and the current crisis that we're facing now, which I won't get into. Okay, so what's the big deal? The big deal is that food prices increased dramatically in a very short period of time. And you can see the bump. Well, I don't have a pointer or anything here, but you can see the first real big bump on the right-hand side. By the way, the actual prices, this is a grouping of foods. Actual prices is in the orange, and the yellow is corrected for inflation. Okay, so it's called the real prices. So this is just the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, UN, their food price index. So it takes into account a lot of products. And you can see this tremendous increase in a very short period of time. The price of rice in Haiti literally doubled within the period of a month. We're talking now 2008. I was in Venezuela during this period of time. Prices were actually being kept fairly calm, although they import a lot because of the tremendous subsidies that the government of Venezuela has and different programs they have for feeding people, which is an interesting issue that people want to talk about. You can see the second, this goes to early 2011, and you can see the prices are starting up. Okay? So this is just the last I could find showing the whole thing. Something that's also very, very interesting is this is the price of oil and the price of food on the same chart with different units, of course. And the red is the price of oil, and whatever that is, bluish, whatever, green, is the price of food. And you can see that they go together. So the price of fuel goes up, the price of oil goes up, the price of food goes up. They go up in tandem, and they tend to go down in tandem as well, which is an interesting phenomenon. And it's partially based on the issue of how energy intensive our agriculture is, that is, the industrialized agriculture, and of the United States and Europe and parts of South America now with the soybeans in Brazil and Argentina, getting into that. And part of it is the competition for agrofuels, or biofuels, which I will talk about when I come back to that issue. So if you just take a look at some individual crops, this is now just a graph showing what happened through the beginning of 2008, partway into 2008. Tremendous increase in the price of corn, soybeans and wheat, and the red arrows were prices on Monday. Okay, and they're about the same today. It's about $7.50 for corn and $13.50 or something like that for soybeans, and wheat's $7 something, $7.50 thereabouts. So those prices they fluctuate on all sorts of bases. So we have at this time, it's estimated by the UN, about 1 billion people out of the 7 billion in the world that are in hunger. And my guess is it's quite a bit larger than that, especially if you take in mineral deficiencies and protein deficiencies, that the number is quite a bit larger, because we have about 3 billion people who are living on less than what $2.50 can buy in the United States a day. That's their daily income. So in the United States, there are currently 50 million people considered to be food insecure. By the way, the U.S. Department of Agriculture abolished hunger maybe 4 or 5 years ago. They used to do a hunger survey, and it was apparently a too politically charged word, and it's now food insecurity is the survey that's done. That's the numbers that you get. And so they also estimate that of the 50 million, within that, there are 12 million adults and 4 million children who are considered to have very low food security, which means that their meals get regularly by somebody in the household. Okay, but this is the United States, where I don't think anybody in this room would have any doubt that there's plenty of food in the United States, plenty of food produced. So let's take a look at what grain production looks like per capita. This is per person in the world. And you can see that it went up pretty dramatically in the period of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's sort of plateaued off and come down a little bit. Some of that some of that is just alternate crops, people eating more vegetables. Some of that is, just other uses for the land. But it only takes about 230 kilograms of grain to provide the calories for the person per year. And so even though it's come down a little bit, we're still producing on a worldwide basis more than enough food. I'm not just talking calories, I'm not talking protein, I'm not talking other things that people should be eating, but we're producing more than enough to do. Okay, so there's enough food produced worldwide to provide everybody with a basic nutritious diet. On the other hand, a lot of the food is, well, on the other hand, there are many economic, social, environmental problems associated with the way in which food is grown, processed, and distributed. And these include a whole bunch of, let me see, I'm trying to remember what, okay. Just let me just talk about some of the issues. I don't want to go into any of these in detail, but I'll show you some slides on a couple of them. What are the ramifications of industrial scale and methodology farming as practiced in the U.S. and Australia, Europe, and parts of South America, and now coming into Africa, by the way. Number one, it's, as I mentioned before, it's very energy intensive. And the energy is not just what you think about when you think about large-scale industrial production. You say, oh my God, look at these big tractors or the diesel they're using. About a third of the energy that goes into producing corn in the Midwest of the United States is to produce the nitrogen fertilizer and ship it and apply it to the fields. Okay? So nitrogen is very energy intensive to break the triple bond between two nitrogens in the air and two molecules. And so it's also, by the way, pesticides are very energy intensive to make. They don't use a lot per pound on land, but they're very energy intensive to make. So the system is very energy intensive, and that has lots of ramifications. There is a tremendous amount of air and water pollution with nutrients. Part of it has to do with the issue that John was talking about, this really rupturing of the cycling of nutrients and the separation of people from the land that produces their food, and the separation of animals from the land that produces their feed. And this leaves you with a lot of extra nitrates getting into the groundwater and flowing off as runoff. And that's not just the only issue, because there's a tremendous amount of just overuse of nitrogen fertilizer. There's tremendous amounts, and that leaches out, gets into the tile drainage in the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. The soil, water, and people are contaminated with pesticides. The worst, of course, are farm workers, where they are working in an environment where spraying is being done on a routine basis. Farmers who use pesticides and farm workers tend to have dramatically higher incidences of certain cancers and other diseases as well. And by the way, the food that we eat is also contaminated with pesticides. There's a survey done every year of produce, and you can get it, I believe it's USDA, but it could be Food and Drug, but I think it's USDA. But anyway, and you can see the amount of the detectable limits of pesticides used on various crops that at the point where we buy them. And some of the foods, strawberries, blueberries have a lot of pesticides in them. Because they're grown under monoculture, because they're not grown in an ecologically sound way, pesticides are just applied on a routine basis in very high rates. Animals are raised under very inhumane conditions, and I think for me this is an issue. It's not only the issue of the rift of the nutrient cycle, where animals will eat the food and the manure goes back. You see a lot of the food that goes into an animal, the feed that goes into an animal, comes out as manure and urine. It's only a very small percentage that goes into actually adding mass to the animal. Something like 8 pounds of feed if you're doing a good job per pound of beef. something like 3 of these high-tech situations, pounds of grains to produce a pound of chicken. So you're losing stuff in the process. But the animals are raised under really strikingly inhumane conditions. This is 45,000 birds in this industrial, you can't call it a farm really, but this is in the Delmarva Peninsula, Maryland, Delaware. I'm not sure whether, this was either in Delaware or Maryland, I'm not sure where we were at the point where we took the picture. There's a person who goes through, one of his main jobs is to pick up the dead birds and to get rid of them. These are being raised for food. Okay, another issue is soil. Well, before I get to this, let me just get back to that. These animals are fed on a routine basis antibiotics, and we're getting antibiotics in the producing antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria, etc. You get, in the third world especially, these systems are displacing people from the land, and they're going into the slums and cities. About half the people live in cities, and about half the people live in rural areas. In the cities, 1/3 of the people are living in slums on a worldwide basis. Because we're talking about over 1 billion people are living in slums in the cities around the world. So when they leave the land and forced off the land, that's the fate. Another issue has to do with intensive agriculture is in the industrial model especially, is erosion and soil degradation in many different ways. And one of the ways is erosion, where I won't go through the whole process, but it's a downward spiral. And it can happen also in other countries, I mean, under other systems, where you don't return enough organic matter, where you're not using good rotations, and it just spirals downwards. The soil becomes less and less fertile, and it produces less, needs more fertilizer, etc. Also, large quantities of carbon are leaving the soil. When you plow a soil and work it out, it accelerates the decomposition of organic matter. So you have CO2 being given off into the atmosphere. And I once made the calculation that for every 1% organic matter you had in the soil to 1 foot, that was equivalent to all the CO2 in the atmosphere of the field. So there's about on a worldwide basis, 3 times the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere stored in soils is carbon, which means organic matter. So erosion is not an old issue that's gone away. This has just taken a few years to go in Iowa. And when we have some very intense storms, and we seem to be having more of them frequently as climate change is occurring, you can get a tremendous amount of erosion. And it usually happens in these intense storms, short duration, and it may not happen again for another few years. Farmers forget about it, they fill in the gullies, and they're planting corn after corn, or maybe soybeans with corn alternating, and that is not a good rotation. That's the basic story of in good parts of the Midwest. This is from, what day is today, the 14th. This is from yesterday's New York Times. High prices sow seeds of erosion. There's a lot of land being converted into row crops in this area that have never been farmed before. That's what farmers are talking about the bulldozing of land that was too steep and costly to farm to be profitable in years of ordinary prices. It brings more highly erodible land into production because they're out to make more money on every acre. And the thing that's really smacking us now are the high intensity, high volume rainstorms that we're getting. Rick Cruz is an agronomist at ISU, Ohio State University in Ames. In a variety of locations, we're losing topsoil considerably faster, 10 to as much as 50 times faster than it's farming. Okay? So this affects the whole issue of being able to have productive soils in the future. So, so we got enough food to feed everyone. A lot of it's being produced in what I would call anti-ecological system of industrial agriculture, which I've only given you sort of some of the highlights. On the other hand, we know how to grow food in an ecologically sound way using agroecological approaches. And this is not magic, it's not hocus pocus, it really can be done. And can be done on small scale, it can be done on medium scale, it becomes very hard to do on large scale, but it may be even possible to do that. But it requires a completely different set of ways of doing things, a mindset, a way of working the land, of what crops you're growing, etc. And that's not necessarily consistent with the economic incentives that are out there. So let me just talk about this would be a course right here, okay? Sort of what is, how do you manage agriculture from an ecological point of view? And there are different ways to approach this, and I use different ways to approach this myself. But one of the ways I talk about it is that you should be doing one of three things when you are managing your fields in agriculture. I'm talking about plant agriculture, but it would be analogous in animal as well. And everything that you do should be doing one or more of these. And one is to create the habitat above ground and below ground in the soil for healthy plants with enhanced defense capabilities. And this is not a hocus pocus issue on it. Plants have defense systems. And they have numerous defense systems. For fungi, they have things you can do that help them have better relationships with mycorrhizal fungi, which are symbiotic and beneficial, that stop diseases from forming. This is one type of resistance that forms when you have the appropriate bacteria in the soil inducing the plant to produce salicylic acid, which is aspirin, as you know, and the plant then produces defense proteins that actually slow down the feeding of an insect or a disease that could try to take over. Another thing you can do is stress pests. Okay, and there are lots of ways to stress pests. Just even planting the same crop but different varieties of it can confuse pests sometimes. But this is just a field of a vegetable farm, just with many, many different crops. Okay, different types of crops, interspersed a row of this, a couple of rows of that, et cetera, instead of these huge, humongous fields, all of lettuce, or huge, humongous fields, all of corn, or whatever. So that confuses pests and stress them. And there's many other things you can do also. You can smother weeds with cover crops. And there's many different things. This is just some examples. And the other thing is you can attract beneficial insects. So growing healthy plants that have defense enhanced capabilities, stressing pests, and doing things above ground and below ground that enhance beneficials. And one of those things, actually there's two things going on in this particular field. This is a farmer in New Hampshire who grows tomatoes by using a cover crop. In the off-season, he plants hairy vetch, then he mows part of it, and then he plants his tomatoes in there. Okay, I mean, he does put down some plastic, and then later he comes and mows the rest, and that's a mulch which suppresses the weeds, so it's stressing the weeds, but it's also providing some habitat meanwhile for beneficial organisms. So you have an amazing thing, which is worth the whole discussion in and of itself, that plants actually have a defense system that's not talked about here, when they're fed upon by insects, most plants will give off volatile compounds, that is gaseous chemicals, and those will attract a specific beneficial organism that wants to either eat that herbivore, the guy that's eating the plant, or lay its eggs, and as the eggs develop, it will kill the insect that is feeding. A lot of those are small parasitic or parasitoids, wasps. They don't sting us or anything. There are many different species of them. And it is an amazing relationship that developed by co-evolution. There's much more to it than that. It's just part of it. This is just showing you an example. This is from Pennsylvania, from an experiment there. But these are soils managed in two different ways. Okay? One is a standard way that farmers grow it in conventional agriculture. And the other is using essentially organic practices, but manure, better crop rotations, that is using a sod-type crop for a number of years, like a clover or perennial grass. And I've shown this picture to many farm audiences, and I've asked them, which would you rather have, the soil on the left or the soil on the right? And anybody here want the one on the left? I mean, you can see it from the picture that it's more compact. It's got this organic matter, it's a lighter color. And you see this especially, the difference between these two under stress, under water stress. That's where you see it especially so. So the reality is that we know how to grow food in an ecologically sound way. We know how to build healthy soils. This is not, and the UN, by the way, there's a report that came out in December last year. I'm just quoting from it, drawing on an extensive review of the scientific literature published in the last 5 years. Not sure you really needed that, but anyway, the special rapporteur identifies agroecology as a mode of agricultural development which not only shows strong conceptual connections with the right to food, but has proven results for fast progress, in the concretization of this human right and for many vulnerable groups in various countries and environments. Moreover, it delivers advantages that are complementary to better-known conventional approaches such as breeding high-yielding varieties. And the reality is, it contributes also strongly to the broader economic development. The reality is that you can get yields just as good, if not better, by using agroecological approaches than using the industrial approaches with regard to plants. Okay? And this has been shown. And it's the main advantage to these highly mechanized farms is not that they produce more per acre, but they produce more per labor hour. That is their advantage. It's 1,000, now we've got to be 2,000, 3,000 acre grain farms in the Midwest. That is their advantage. They can produce a lot of corn per hour of work. Okay, so that and all of the Roundup Ready technology, et cetera, has really helped them to do that. Most actually can talk about biotech if you'd like to. We certainly can. So there's plenty of food. A lot of it's grown using lousy methods. People are hungry, and we know how to grow food better. So, how can it happen? How does it happen? How do you explain it? And number one, of course, people are poor. People are hungry because they're poor. There are no rich people hungry in the world, but I'm a worker. Okay, so it's an issue of insufficient, or what economists would call effective demand. You may have a human need for something, but you don't have the purchasing power to purchase it. And there are a tremendous number of implications of food being considered a commodity just like any other commodity. In our economic system, that is capitalism, it is basically a system of producing commodities, all different types, from computers to cars to pencils to whatever. And food products are just other commodities. And you as an individual have no more right to that than you have to a BMW or to a diamond necklace or a Rolex watch, or it doesn't make any difference. If you got the money, you got a right to it. If you don't got the money, you've got no right to it whatsoever. All right? So this is really the underlying issue in the world, is that it's an issue of poverty. And it's an issue of considering food to be a commodity just like any other commodity. And no difference, and you have no more right to it than any others. Another issue is that as supply and demand gets tight, you can still have plenty of food to speculate around it. Okay, and this could be, by the way, at the local level, it's called hoarding. And this was the thing I showed you in the Philippines. That's one of the things that happens, is that local stores will start, or storage places will start to hoard their grain, not sell it as rapidly as they would other sell it with rice next year, because they think maybe in another month the price is going to be higher, so why sell it today? But it's become, commodities have become, that is, agricultural commodities, have become a major form of speculation in financial markets. And in March 2008, the amount of corn, wheat, soybeans, etc., that was tied up by financial contracts by speculators was equivalent to maybe a third of the amount that was in storage in the U.S. at that time, just to give you some idea of the degree of speculation. So, and the same thing, by the way, with oil. You know, the speculators jump in, it gets a little tight. Libya's not because of what's happening over there, is not shipping out the oil, and there's still enough oil, but they say, and I don't know where they come up with these numbers, that $20 a barrel of the price of oil is due to speculation. I have no idea how one comes up with that kind of a number, and I don't know what the percentage is of the food increase in price. But certainly, that's playing a major, major role. And another thing is that farmers will switch crops to other types of crops that might provide them more income that are not necessarily food crops. And what is projected to happen in the United States in 2011 in the South is that because of the tremendous increase in cotton prices, farmers in the South are going to switch from corn and soybeans and some wheat into cotton. I mean, not everybody, obviously, but there'll be a tendency in that direction. There was still cotton before, but the relative prices make it attractive to produce more cotton unless food or beef grows. So you have that. That's another aspect of food as a commodity. The other thing that's happening also is that as people get interested because of what's happening to the price of food, there's a tremendous land grab going on an international basis. And this is talked about some, but I don't have the slide I want next. I'm going to pass by a couple of slides. That's the one I want next. Prices of land in the Midwest of the United States have shot up. It's now, last I heard, Magdoff is an agricultural economist in Iowa State, and he said, I forgot it was last month, land in Iowa was being sold good farmland for $10,000 an acre. For farmland, this is not development. So what they're telling people in Iowa is, well, maybe you ought to go buy land in Brazil or someplace else. And by the way, that's what the Brazilian Amazon looks like now. A good part of it, forest remnant left, you can see, and the rest of that is soybeans being produced for export, the export market in Brazil. So, but it's not just South America. This is from less than a month ago. Ethiopia at the center of a farmland rush. Locals move out as international contractors seize opportunities offered by government to lease farmland at knockdown rates. I'm talking about $1 or $2. Oh, excuse me, it's not up there. This thing shows me the next slide that's coming. So anyway, so that is another issue, and there is some 50 million acres of land in Africa. Mainly Sudan, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Madagascar, Cameroon, Mozambique, Senegal, and Mali, has been either purchased or is under long-term lease to sovereign wealth funds, governments like the United Arab Emirates that want to produce food for the home market, or private capital that either wants to produce food, mainly for export, or wants to produce jatropha. People know about that? It's a biofuel crop. It's not edible. It's actually poisonous, but it has a fairly good oil content. So, of course, what's happening is, as this is going on, is displacing more people from the land because this is being done by governments that make corrupt deals relatively incredibly favorable rates for the sale or for the lease of the land. Okay, so then farmers make decisions based, how did I leave this out? I'm going back to this. It wasn't, you see, this is the problem. Okay, so in the United States, one of the issues is that so much of our corn is going into ethanol. So we have an alternative use because it's a commodity like any other commodity. If you can make money in the ethanol business, you may as well use it for that rather than to feed people or to feed animals. So you can see where the ethanol plants are concentrated. That's where the main corn growing region is. But it's not just ethanol. And palm oil is a very big issue because the oil, palm produces the oil that's used by a lot of people for a basic part of their diet. Cooking oils are a major calorie input to a lot of Southeast Asian diets. And so because the Europeans want to have a so-called green biofuel to substitute for oil, forests are being cut down in Indonesia, Borneo, Malaya, in order to plant palm oil, oil palm, in order to produce palm oil for the market. It's estimated that it will take 400 years to pay back carbon that's lost from the soils in that process. Okay? Because of the accelerated organic matter decomposition of carbon that goes on by cutting down wood forest and the burning and the disruption of the soil. The ethanol story, by the way, in the United States, David Pimentel and Cornell calculates that you're actually losing energy. There's more energy going in to make ethanol than you're getting out of it, than you're getting out of it. Now, there are other estimates that say, well, you're actually got, 10% or something, getting extra energy out. But corn is very energy intensive to grow, as I told you, it's grown. And also, just distilling the ethanol, it's got to be distilled 3 times to get rid of all the water. Tremendous water pollution issues also from the distillation plants. And so it's something. Okay. I just did this calculation a couple of days ago. How do we do it, just to make sure I didn't screw something up here. But in 2009, about a third of the U.S. corn crop was used to make ethanol. And that was 13 billion bushels, by the way. It was about 12 billion last year. It's billion bushels. Bushels is 56 pounds. And that could have provided enough calories for 470 million people for a year. Now, we're not talking about a trivial issue here with regard to human hunger. The price of oil goes up, the price of ethanol goes up. The price of ethanol goes up, the price of corn goes up, and who gets lost in the whole deal is the poor. Okay, this we've seen. This I'd like to get to. With regard to the third world, what used to be called the third world, sometimes the countries of the South, or the developing countries, some of which are and some of which aren't developing. Many of them bought into something that is called the Washington Consensus or neoliberal approach, which is essentially, basically, get the government off the back of get them off the back of the small farmers, don't subsidize them, and just let capital flow in, let capital flow out. If you don't have enough food, you import it, and you will produce whatever you need to export so that you can have the money to buy what you need to import. So this is basically a long-term crisis that's developed because of accepting this ideology. It's a philosophy would be too grandiose a term for it. It really is an ideology, in which, by the way, the United States never followed and doesn't to this day. We support our farmers. We have all sorts of supports for other businesses too. And so this is actually, the hypocrisy of this is amazing. But the idea was get the government out of agriculture and let the farmers do their thing. Get the government out of business, let the farmers do their thing. The government shouldn't be storing grain, let private companies store the grain. It's all really good. So the idea is, and this, by the way, was forced on some countries, I'll tell you in a second, and some was just advice that was given. Let the free market do its magic, basically. Let the market do its thing. This is a report from the World Bank in 2007. In most reforming countries, the private sector did not step in to fill the vacuum when the public sector did. Okay? So what happened? What happened was that people suffered, essentially. Jeffrey Sachs was a major proponent of this. I don't know if people know about Jeffrey Sachs. He's changed a lot, but he helped to introduce the Russian rapid privatization of the economy and in the process a decrease of the Russian longevity by about 10 years in the process. Anyway, The whole thing was based on the idea that if you take away the government for the poorest of the poor, somehow these markets will solve the problems. But markets can't step in and won't step in when people have nothing. As they say nowadays, duh. And if you take away help, you leave them to die. And so this is what was happening. And some countries have reversed this trend and some haven't. This is all built into the World Trade Organization, the whole philosophy of the international trade that's going on. If you haven't seen the movie, Life and Debt, that's D-E-B-T, I know it's got a little fuzzy, get it out or download it or however you get it and see it if you want to understand what I'm talking about. And this is about the island of Jamaica. It's not the only issue, but one of the major themes of the movie is the destruction of Jamaican agriculture by imports from the United States. And it's not just crops that are subsidized, corn, rice, things like that. Carrots and whatever, onions and whatever, you'll see it. It is a very fascinating video on many different levels. And one of the themes, there are, I'd say, three major themes in the business. This is Bill Clinton, by the way, last year, after the earthquake in Haiti. He was testifying before I believe it was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We made a devil's bargain. May have been good for some of my farmers in Arkansas, but it has not worked. Instead, I had to live every day with the consequences of the loss of capacity to produce a rice crop in Haiti to feed those people because of what I did. Nobody else. He feels their pain. That's one of Bill Clinton's fortes. But that's what happened. The ability of Haiti to feed itself, which wasn't great, was made even worse by opening up their markets to the flood of food coming in. When it was cheap, it wasn't too bad, but the price of rice literally doubled in a month. People who were spending 70 or 80% of their income on food run out of money. Okay, so this becomes an issue of starvation. I mean, he's right in what he's saying here. I don't know how genuinely he feels it, but that is true. So Samira Min, who was a very interesting, what you call him, political scientist, I guess, who's Egyptian, based in Senegal, he made an estimate that really all you need is 20 million farmers in the whole world to produce all the food. Highly mechanized, large scale, they can produce enough food for everybody. Well, that may be. That may be. But the problem isn't, number one, enough food. The other problem is, what do you do with the people who are producing food now? We have still about half of the world lives in rural areas. Maybe 1.5 billion or more people engaged in agriculture in some way. And what happens when they get displaced from the land if there isn't something for them to do where they can earn money to buy the food? So it goes back to that commodity issue. And so, oh yeah, there's a little note in there. There's one person in Brazil, he was the governor of the state, I don't know if he still is in Mato Grosso. He's called the Soybean King, and he controls 500,000 acres that's being grown to continuous soybeans. Okay, so we're talking about, obviously, this is not work by one person. And now you have a GPS, you can keep track of tractor drivers and different parts, and you can, manage this. He's not doing it himself, in terms of number of managers. And they just give you some idea of what the scale looks like. This is soybean harvesters being followed by maize corn planters. To give you some idea of the scale of agriculture in Mato Grosso. So these are some Filipino farmers sitting around. The fellow in the middle there has got his hand. He has 1 hectare of land. It's mostly rice, some vegetables, which he's selling now. And if the trends continue of this producing more and more food by highly mechanized farms, no matter where they are, we have the environmental degradation, but we also have the issue of what is going to happen to these people who are on the land now, who are still on the land, who are maybe eking out of existence, but at least they're eking out of existence. And one of the major issues of the world, really, to me, is how do you keep people on the land? And how do we get more people, I would say, in the United States back to the land? Because we need to have smaller scale agriculture where you can do a better job. I don't know if you've heard the saying that the best fertilizer is the farmer's footprint, which means basically, know your land. And a farmer that knows that land is able to do a better job in farming by knowing the individual aspects. So we come down to what we need, really, in my opinion, is producing food for people. But that is what you produce food for. You're not producing food as a commodity. I'm thinking about what's needed as an approach. And governments, instead of getting out of the business, I'm talking about governments in Africa and Latin America, et cetera, in parts of Asia, need to get back into helping agriculture and working together with farm organizations. There are some tremendous things going on in the developing countries in regard to farm organizations that are trying to implement ecological, agroecological approaches to agriculture, and are trying to get access to land where they don't have land, and so there's some tremendously interesting stories about it. And the goal should be a self-sufficient, a sufficient diet for everyone in the world, regardless. Food just isn't a commodity really in either world. And that we need to encourage regional and national self-sufficiency because you can't rely on the markets. It doesn't mean on everything, but it means that at least for the basic foods that your people eat in your country, you should be more or less self-sufficient so that you don't have to go through what's happening right now in many countries. And obviously, ecological approaches should be used, and we should be doing it on basically medium to small-scale farming, where it's just easier to do the rotations, easier to keep track of what's happening. And of course, getting back to John's introduction, part of that is reuniting the animals with the land that produces their feed. There are a lot of synergies that occur when animals and crops are raised on the same farm that you don't get when you divorce them, that are lost in that process. And I can get into that if you're interested. In addition to the issue of nutrients, other issues as well. So A, we got enough food. B, we could still produce enough food using agroecological approaches, ecological approaches. And we still have hunger in the world and a lousy agricultural system for a good part of it, which is causing many environmental problems. These are not scientific issues. These are really hard economic and political issues. And it comes down to, in my mind, the question of food as a right and not as a commodity. And if it is a commodity, as long as we have more people, we're going to have hunger. And hunger in the United States, by the way, is not just unemployed people. It's also people who are employed in low-wage jobs who don't make enough. One of the reasons, by the way, there are two reasons why you don't see, there has been an increase in food prices. I know it's probably not reflected at Oberlin, but they probably need their deals with food providers, food service providers for the year. But the food prices have been going up in the U.S. But you don't see it as much for two reasons. One is a gimmick, of course. There was a story about this last week in the New York Times. They're putting less food into packages, the same size. So it's just a gimmick. You think you're getting the same thing, but instead of X number of ounces, it's 3/4 of that. The other thing is we eat so much processed food. I'm talking about Americans as a whole. The actual ingredients that go into it are a relatively small part of the price. So I calculated what would happen to a loaf of bread if the price of wheat went, as it did, from $4 a bushel to $7 a bushel. So it's $3 difference. And I figured out that it would increase the price of the loaf of bread by 3 cents. So why? Because everything else that goes into the bread, and the labor, the transportation, the packaging, the advertising, etc., is what's the cause. The wheat that goes into it is a relatively small percentage of the actual cost of the bread. So that you're not seeing, when you're not buying the raw commodity and eating it yourself, you don't see the increase in that, but you will be seeing. Well, I don't even know what time, I don't know what time it is. I don't even know where I was on the schedule, whatever, and I'm moving around a lot of different issues here. And better quit, but I'll show you again. John showed you before. These are both fairly new books. The book on soils, if anybody's interested, can be downloaded for free. Just go to sare.org, and they've got a new website, which only went up relatively recently. Just get the publications somehow. And they've got a lot of different publications, all of them are downloadable. And this book is one of them. And there are other ones that are interesting, also fact sheets and brochures, which are also freely available as PDFs. I think I'll quit. Thank you. Yeah.
Dr. Magdoff would be happy to take questions, and I think I'm going to let him go ahead and call on people.